What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing Listener Encounters Volume 19, and I'm really excited. I can't believe we're at Volume 19 already. I don't think our video today needs much of an introduction, except for me to thank everyone who sent their encounter stories in for this one. The response was overwhelming, and just know that if you don't hear your story in this video, it'll be in the next one, or possibly even the next one after that. I don't like to make the videos too long if I don't have to. And since it's an ongoing series for this channel, if you sent in your encounter, it is guaranteed to come up at one point or another in a listener encounters video at some point. For a while, it took me kind of a long time to get motivated to get these videos out. But now they're my absolute favorite thing to do on this channel for the most part, because there's no research involved. I mean, if I'm just being honest. With that being said, if you're waiting to hear your story and it isn't in this video, if you email me and let me know you're waiting, I will try my best to email you or otherwise communicate to you when it's going to air on the channel so you can make sure you're watching. Because I know before I got started on YouTube and before I got into all this, one of the first things I did was I sent my own personal encounter with the Glimmerman, before I even put it on my channel, to Steve Stockton for Missing Persons Mysteries. And when he covered it, I was so excited to hear it. And I have, people who email me that are like, Gemma, are you putting my story, in the listener encounters? When's it coming out? So I'm aware that most people who send in their encounter want to at least listen to it. So if you let me know that, I will let you know when it's coming up. So thanks again. And let's jump right in. Our first encounter comes from a man who asked me to call him Fred in order to protect his anonymity and privacy. Here's what he had to say. I'm just going to get right into it. Quote, "Hey Gemma, thank you for giving us a platform to tell our stories. I feel very safe with you and within the community that seemingly follows you around. I am a regular viewer and subscriber and only changed my name because several people in my home also follow your channel, and I haven't ever told them about this." That is so cool. Thank you. "It's crazy, LOL. I feel safer with you than I do with my own family. It isn't that they're mean or anything, and we're all believers. I guess I just don't want them looking at me any differently or expecting me to constantly want to tell my story. It was terrifying and it was traumatizing, and after I tell it to you here right now, I don't think I ever plan on speaking of it again. Anyway, I just wanted you to know I appreciate you so much. So here's my story. It was 2012 and I was driving a yellow cab. I don't know if Uber existed at that time, but if it did, I had never heard about it and don't think we had them in my area. I got to basically choose my own hours, and I liked working the overnight shifts. My wife also worked overnight at the hospital in our area, so it was better for us to be on the same schedule. We didn't have any kids yet, and we're really just starting out our lives together. I was having somewhat of a crazy night. It seemed like I was only being called to pick drunks up from the bar that night, and each time I went and picked up one of the drunk people, their behavior would get crazier and crazier. It wasn't anything scary, it was just really annoying. I'm sure you know how annoying drunk people can be. I was glad to do it though because it meant they weren't on the roads and driving home. I was trying to stay focused on that, the bigger picture. It was around 4 in the morning, and I should mention I live in a big city that's somewhat near northern New Jersey, where I think you said you live. It's busy all the time, and I grew up here and know that there's never a time at night or in the middle of the night when there's absolutely no one out on the streets. But that night it was different. I had just dropped off a group of young 20-somethings, which I was one, but I didn't and still don't drink to excess, and was driving around looking for a place to park and wait for the next call to come in. I didn't smoke in my cab, but I did smoke cigarettes, so I got out of the cab on the side of a somewhat desolate road and lit a cigarette. I remember feeling an eerie and creepy feeling, like my skin was crawling, but I couldn't pinpoint what the reason for those feelings were. I looked around and noticed that there wasn't a single person anywhere, and I attributed my fear to that fact. I hadn't ever known a time in my life where there wasn't anyone out on the streets or out on their stoops, even in the middle of the night. I can't stress that point enough. I looked around and also noticed that all of the lights in all of the buildings were off. This was a residential area, and it was very strange to me that all of the apartments all around me, they were high rises, so there were probably hundreds of windows, that not a single one of them had any lights on inside at all. I tried to ignore the feelings I had and smoked my cigarette, and I decided to just look down on the ground and not pay attention to the odd situation I felt like I had found myself in. Everything was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. That was another eerie thing. There were no cats or even rats running around, no scurrying about and getting into all of the garbage. It was so strange, and I tried to smoke as fast as I could so I could get back into my car. I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, but again, I ignored it. I flicked my cigarette and got back into my car. I had the windows rolled up and I was sure to lock all the doors. I was never that paranoid about anything, and up until that point, I had never felt unsafe in my cab or while driving around in the middle of the night. The neighborhood I was in that night wasn't a high crime neighborhood or anything like that, but sometimes bad things do happen, mainly because it's a big, huge city. When I got in the car, I turned it on, and after I locked all the doors, I immediately noticed that there was no static coming from my radio. The radio is how dispatch would contact me to set me up with the next ride. Again, this wasn't anything like Uber, and they would have to give me the address, and I would have to find the place, sometimes using paper maps, as the cabs weren't equipped with GPS systems. This was very strange and highly unusual, and I tried to use the radio to call dispatch, but it was completely and totally dead. Then, my car died. I tried restarting it over and over again, but it was completely dead and not working. For some reason, instead of just being annoyed and mildly irritated, I was in a complete and total panic. I had sweat pouring down my face and my upper body was soaked, despite it being November on the East Coast. The weather had been mild that night, but definitely not anything where I should have been sweating that profusely. I'll admit it, I was scared. As I turned the key once again to start the car, I was cursing and begging the Lord to help me out. I knew innately in the primal part of my brain that something bad was happening to me, but I had no idea, not consciously anyway, what it was that was happening. Suddenly, I felt very dizzy, but before I could even really register that feeling, there was a loud banging coming from my left side. Someone was pounding on my window. I jumped and let out a squeal, and then I looked up to see who it was. I was immediately terrified, and my blood ran cold right down to my bones as I was looking into two black eyes. They were all black and unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a young man, probably about 17 years old, and he was pounding incessantly on the window even as I looked up at him. As I looked up into the soulless orbs he had for eyeballs, he finally noticed that I looked up and must have seen how terrified I was. He had on a dull gray hoodie and he had the hood up, which hid a lot of his face. It didn't hide his eyes, though, if that's what he was going for. I immediately had the thought of, thank goodness for the street lights. But as I thought it, the lights above me started to flicker, and then every single light on the street, all of the street lights, went out simultaneously and all at once. Hey, mister, I need a ride home. I need to go home or my mom will be really worried. Can I come inside of your car? Will you give me a ride home so my mom doesn't worry about me? I couldn't even speak at first. All I could do was stare at those black eyes. I stuttered out my response. I'm sorry, but my car just broke down. It isn't working right now. I can't give you a ride. The smirk the boy had on his face the whole time up until that point disappeared, and a look of rage immediately crossed his face. You have to give me a ride. Invite me in. Let me into your car. I can't come in unless you invite me. I was shocked, and I couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there staring at him as he started to kick and pound at my cab, insisting I let him in. No, insisting that I invite him into the car. I snapped back into reality and tried once again to start my cab. It wouldn't turn over, and the enraged boy kept yelling and kicking my car, demanding that I invite him in and give him a ride. I kept thinking on and off about vampires and how the legends say you have to invite them in or else they can't enter wherever it is that you are. I yelled for him to get away from the car and I told him I was going to call the cops. I looked around for my cell phone and I finally found it lying on the back seat. I didn't use it much and especially didn't use it while I was driving. As I picked up the phone and flipped it open, the boy stopped raging and had that serene and calm look on his face again. The smirk returned. Good luck with that, he said between gritted teeth. I saw that my phone was completely dead and it wouldn't turn on when I tried. I was desperate but couldn't get out of the car and run away. I was scared of a teenager. It wasn't just scared, though. I was terrified and I didn't know what to do. The boy once again insisted I invite him in and give him a ride home so that his mother wouldn't be worried. His voice was calming and smooth, and it suddenly made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, and I found myself thinking that it would be okay if I just let this kid into my cab? After all, he was just a boy and he didn't have any reason to hurt me. He was thin and pale. He looked malnourished, emaciated almost, and like a slight wind would have been able to blow him over. He didn't have any weapons or anything. These are the thoughts that were running through my mind. My hand reached for the lock and I was going to let him in. I was going to let him in. I looked back up as my hand reached for the door handle, but as I did, I once again locked eyes with him. I once again snapped back to reality, and the fear flooded through me like nothing I had ever felt before or since. I very quickly withdrew my hand and tried starting my car again. The radio crackled to life as the engine finally turned over. All of the street lights turned on at the same exact time, just as they had gone off. I was so relieved, and when I looked up, the boy was gone. My supervisor was yelling into the radio, obviously worried that something had happened to me. I got on the radio and told her I was ending my shift early and driving back to the cab company. She was confused, but didn't argue with me, and though I never told her what had happened to me that night, she later told me that she knew I had been through some sort of ordeal as soon as she laid eyes on me, and that's why she didn't give me an issue about calling it in early. I took 2 weeks off after that just to try to recover from what happened to me. I had to go back to work after that, though, because we needed my income to pay the high rent in the area where we lived. I told everyone, eventually, when they would ask, that someone pulled a gun on me but ran off when the streetlights went out. Most of them believed it, and those who didn't were too polite to ask any further questions. My wife is one of the people who didn't believe me, but to this day, I've never told her or anyone else what happened to me out there in the middle of a giant and popular city in the middle of the night. It wasn't until a couple of years later when I came across someone else's story and dealing with that same type of kid that I knew I had been dealing with something supernatural. Don't get me wrong, I knew that from the beginning, but I think I only knew it subconsciously. I didn't want to accept it. That show I watched where the man told his own story of being approached by at least 3 of them in a parking lot one night sealed it for me and gave what happened to me a name. The Black-Eyed Kids. I couldn't believe it. It helped me so much to know that I wasn't alone, and I bought both of your books on the subject. They've also helped me so much because now I at least understand the experience a little bit better, though I still get scared sometimes when I'm out in my Uber at night in the middle of the night, and especially when I have to ride down that same street. I don't park there anymore, and in fact, if I get out to vape, I let dispatch know where I am and what I'm doing. Mainly, though, I just vape in the car. Thanks for letting me share. I never saw the kid again, and I'm pretty sure that your theory that gaining entry isn't the point, but the terror we feel is what they're looking for, is what feeds them, is true. Keep going. Never stop. You're one incredible woman. Sincerely, Fred. Well, thank you, Fred. You are one incredible man, for sure. Yeah, this is really something. So there isn't really much I can say about Fred's encounter that I haven't already said in my books, right? This phenomenon, in my opinion, is one of the creepiest and most terrifying phenomena out there, and I count myself blessed and so very lucky that I've never had to experience an encounter with the Black-Eyed Kids. So I just feel like it's the terror we feel that is the point. They don't actually need to be inside. I feel like if they got inside, they could terrify us even more, and that's why they're so insistent about the invite. I do wonder if Black-Eyed Kids are extraterrestrial or interdimensional. I definitely feel like they're other and not from here. My books about the BEK, Danger at Your Door, Encounters with Black-Eyed Kids, and Midnight Visitors, so they're 2 different books, right? Danger at Your Door has all the research, all of the theories, some encounters, and then Midnight Visitors is just encounters. If you haven't picked them up yet, please do. There is a lot more information about this terrifying phenomenon in there. So let's move on to our next encounter story, and this one comes from our very good friend, Slow Motion. I'm very interested to see what you all think about this encounter, so let's jump right in it. Quote, "A lost time tale. This really happened to me. I have one more real experience if you're interested. Of course I am. It was like so many of these tales begin, a perfectly ordinary day, and as such, it requires context. So an ordinary day for me at that time consisted of, well, I was teaching at the time, so that puts us at around mid to late 90s. It was a Friday at about 12 midday. I was lucky enough to have some input into the setting of the class timetables, and you guessed it, I was finished up by noon Friday every week. Insert smiley face. So I had a routine: get the bus about 3 miles to my local pub, which was usually blessedly empty at that time of day. Me, the bartender, the Times crossword, a pint of the black stuff, and a few hours of blissful silence before the usual post-work week suspects started to trickle in and ruin my own personal brand of Zen meditation. Do you mean Guinness? Because I am so with you if you do. There I was, waiting on the bus, which may or may not arrive soon, depending on the mood of the driver and the will of the transportation gods. It was early September, and the weather was pleasant and rainless, so I decided to earn my beer and walk to the pub, burning some calories before drinking them. The bus route would take me about a half a mile south and turn east and go straight to the small suburban village, which was my destination. So Slow Motion does live in Ireland, so y'all know. So I would cross the road and complete the long side of the virtual triangle by winding my way through the housing estate in between me and my intended pint. Bear in mind, I had spent my life growing up both where I was coming from and going to, so getting lost was an impossibility. Crossing the road, I began a walk, which should have taken me 45 minutes tops at an easy pace. I don't drive, so I could walk the hind legs off a donkey, as my father would say. And here, dear reader, is where the strangeness you have been waiting so patiently to hear about begins. I began walking and settled into that easy stride and switched my brain to autopilot. Anyone who is used to walking a reasonable distance in territory that was as familiar to them as the route taken from the bed to the toilet at night in the dark is in the home you grew up in will understand. I was casually aware of my surroundings, but paying no real attention to them. The next thing I remember was coming back to my full senses about 2 miles south of where I had started from and still about 2.5 miles west of my destination. My immediate feelings were disorientation and a very strong what the F word moment before I could freak out. I started to recognize my surroundings and knew where I was. Okay, let's just get to the bar and think about this over the pint, I reasoned, and set off accordingly, putting all my significant thoughts out onto the back burner until then. Strange, but not excessively so, you may be thinking. My walking autopilot was having a Monday and led me astray. I like that. A reasonable assumption, and one I would have no problem making were I in your shoes. A couple of noteworthy points, however, that you may find of interest. 1, 2 full hours had passed by the time I came to my senses. It should have taken me 45 minutes tops. 2, to get to where I was, you would have had to cross one road, which was a main travel artery on a Friday afternoon in very busy traffic. Not something you can do without being fully aware of what you were doing, not to mention several lesser roads, which could be no less dangerous. Confused? To this day, I sure as hell am. Home is where I go to plan my next adventure. There you go, gems. End quote. There's a lot to unpack here as well. The very first thing I thought of while reading this is the young college-aged men who disappear after a night of drinking with friends, only to be found dead later on in a water source they not only had no business being anywhere near, but that they hadn't been in the whole time they were missing. So I think you guys have heard me talk about this. Some people blame it on a killer or a group of them, and that's what I call the smiley face killer theory. It's actually widely called that, I don't just call it that. I did a whole video about it on my channel. You can go watch it if you want. I'll leave the link in the description box of this video now. I'm talking about this for a reason, so bear with me if you will, and we'll get there. Slow Motion was not a college-aged young man who had been out drinking, but he was on his way to a pub. I have to wonder if there was any water source near where he ended up, near where he came back to his senses. I don't personally think the smiley face thing is real because I don't believe humans are responsible for this phenomenon. I would love to hear what you all have to say in the comments of this video. I would need more information, but I do think what happened here could possibly be some sort of abduction. I don't want to scare you, Mr. Slow Motion, but I do wonder if it's possible you were taken and something was done to you and you simply just have no memories of it. You do live in Ireland, where there's a lot of history of the Fae as well, which makes me wonder if perhaps the fairies had something to do with it. It's possible that they saw something in you, perhaps some DNA in your bloodline, their DNA, that made them take an interest in you. Have you ever experienced anything like this before or since that you remember? Don't answer so quickly. Be sure to ask your family, your parents, and or any siblings, other family members that you might have, if they've ever experienced anything extraterrestrial, fairy related, or related to what you experienced and went through. I truly believe something took you that day. What it was and for what are things I can't answer right now without more information, but your story definitely creeps me out. There's no entities involved that you can remember, but the fact that I know with absolute certainty that there had to have been something, some entities involved here, either extraterrestrial, interdimensional, otherworldly, and not knowing is what makes it even creepier, scarier, and more F-worded up. Love you, slow motion, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I would absolutely be interested in any other encounters and or experiences you've had that you think would be a good fit for this series. Thanks for sharing. Mwah. Our next encounter comes from Janine S. in El Paso, Texas, and it's another one having to do with an old school taxi cab, which is why I chose this one to put in this video. Here's what she had to say, quote, "Hi Gemma, I love your channel, and I just think you are so incredibly sweet and super smart. I love listening to you on Friday nights, and I always listen to your premieres. I just don't chat much, and when I do, it's under my handle, not my actual name, which is Janine S. Anyway, my story. I am 35 years old now, but my encounter happened in 2004 when I was around 15 years old. I was given permission by my parents to go to a friend's Halloween party. It wasn't someone I knew that well, but it was a girl in my grade that my best friend knew because they lived fairly close to one another. My mom said that I could go to the party and then stay at my best friend's house for the night. Now, I had two best friends and they were both going to the party. The one who knew the girl hosting the party is not the one whose house I was going to sleep over. She lived on the other side of town. So her name, the one whose house I was staying at, is Marissa. Marissa's mom and my mom went to high school together, and so my mom trusted her mother's judgment as far as curfew. Marissa's mother told us we had to be home by 1 a.m. Marissa, myself, and our other best friend Janelle all got dressed up in our costumes at Janelle's house. It worked out great because she lived so close to Karen, which is what I will be calling the girl who threw the party. It was a costume party, and we were at that age where the less you wore, the better, unfortunately. And back then, it was very acceptable to dress somewhat slutty for Halloween. I look back and cringe at what we wore back then at such a young age and how no one thought anything about it. No one thought that it was strange or inappropriate in any way. Anyway, that isn't what this is about, just thought I would mention it. So, the three of us got all dressed up, and Janelle had stricter parents than me and Marissa, and she only had until 11 o'clock to be out that night. We got to Karen's house, and only two other girls were there. The party was in her basement, and she had snacks and drinks set up down there, along with some pretty awesome decorations. They were scary. There were no drugs or alcohol involved. We weren't that type of kids. It was around 7 p.m. when we got there, but it wasn't a sleepover party or anything like that, so everyone would be leaving at some point. Because of the late curfew, Marissa's mother had given her money to take a cab home, so she didn't have to go out so late to come and get us from Karen's house. This also wasn't unusual, and we took taxis everywhere back then. We lived in a very safe suburban area, and the community all took care of one another. At around midnight, everyone had left except me and Marissa, and so when Karen asked if we wanted to play with the Ouija board, we were psyched, and it was just the three of us. She had never played with one before, but had gotten one from her aunt or some other relative the year before for Christmas. We were so excited because we had seen them on television and in movies like one of mine and Marissa's favorites at the time, The Craft. Karen set everything up, but she chickened out at the last minute and decided she just wanted to watch me and Marissa play with the board. I was pumped and immediately put my fingers on the planchette along with Marissa and started asking questions. The thing immediately started moving, and when it did, Marissa started squealing and saying how scared she was. She didn't want to play anymore, and that left just me. We were all laughing, though, and it was all in good fun, until we weren't laughing anymore, and it wasn't fun at all. I asked a few simple questions like, is there anyone here with us? And do you want to talk to us? Things like that. Eventually I asked, as Marissa and Karen looked on, who we were speaking to. The planchette moved swiftly across the board and started to spell out the word demon. Once I put all the letters together in my head, I understood what it had spelled and immediately removed my fingers from the board. Marissa and Karen agreed that it was time to put the board away and move on. Marissa said she wanted to go home and that she felt a weird and creepy kind of feeling. Plus, we were going to be late for curfew. We just attributed those feelings to what had just happened with the board. Karen went to grab the board to put it back in the box, but when she did, the planchette moved on its own to the word no. She screamed and backed up. We all sat there, frozen and not knowing what to do, and after about a minute, I grabbed the board and planchette without really even looking at it and put it away back in the box it came in. As soon as I put the lid on the box, the lights downstairs in the basement where we were started to flicker on and off at a very rapid pace. We were scared, and Marissa called for our cab so that we could go back to her house. I went into the bathroom to use it before we left, and when I was in there, I heard a strange noise, like someone was talking to me through some sort of static machine. I understand now, after watching so many ghost hunting shows on television, that it sounded just like an EVP coming through some sort of spirit box. Back then, though, I didn't know about those things and just ran out of the bathroom as soon as I was done. I had no idea what the voice had said, and I did not care. We said goodbye to Karen and went outside to wait for our cab to arrive. Marissa said she didn't feel well and that she had a really bad feeling but didn't know why or what it was all about. I chalked it up to the Ouija board being so creepy and tried not to show her that I was also feeling very uncomfortable and scared due to that experience. I hadn't even said anything about what had happened to me in the bathroom yet. Our taxi eventually pulled up, and it was a very nice Jamaican man. He asked us where we were going to confirm the address, and off we went. It was about a 20-minute ride to Marissa's house from Karen's house. The cab driver didn't speak much, and when we were about halfway to her house, the radio in the cab suddenly came to life. It was very loud and sounded like nothing but static. The driver looked at us in the rear view and smiled, possibly sensing our unease and discomfort and thinking maybe that it had something to do with him. He reached over and turned the radio down, but as he did, that same voice I had heard in the bathroom, the staticky voice that I couldn't understand, came through the radio, roaring loud and clear. It said, "Your soul," really loud and very clearly. The man froze and looked at us in the mirror again, but this time he wasn't smiling. He looked scared. Marissa and I were just as frozen in the back seat as we looked at him in the mirror. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and clicked off the radio. The rest of the ride was completely silent. No one said anything, and Marissa and I still had the creeped out feeling we had been feeling ever since we touched that godforsaken Ouija board. When we were about a block away from Marissa's house, the driver suddenly stopped the car, which was very strange and not a normal thing for a cab driver to have been doing. I asked him what he was doing, but he didn't answer. I looked at him in the rearview mirror and saw that his eyes had turned completely black, meaning no whites at all and no color to them either. He opened his mouth and started to make a strange sort of gurgling noise, and as he did so, he spoke through it all. He said, "Your souls. We want your souls." Marissa and I screamed and jumped out of the cab. She threw the money onto the back seat and we booked it, running as fast as we possibly could, in bare feet, I might add, to her house. The cab didn't move the whole time we ran, and we knew this because we could still see him sitting there in the distance in the middle of the road when we got to her front door and finally looked back. We went upstairs, changed into our pajamas, and went right to sleep without saying a single word to one another. It turned out that we both had the same nightmares of some sort of demonic creatures chasing us through the woods near where our church is and screaming about wanting our souls. Marissa told me about her nightmare the very next morning, and I told her about mine as well, and we both had dreamed the exact same thing. We both described the creatures in the woods in the exact same words as those that had come out of the mouth of the cab driver the night before. I left her house later that day to go home, and we never mentioned this again. To this day, we don't talk about it, but I'm sure she will hear the story now because she's also one of your subscribers. We're still friends. Nothing else ever happened that we could connect or contribute to what happened to us that night, and we also never found out if the cab driver was okay. He was seemingly possessed, although we didn't know what it was at the time. I often wonder what would have happened if Marissa hadn't been so quick to think for us to get out of the car and run when the driver had been so clearly possessed by whatever entity it was. I wonder if perhaps it was the creature or creatures from the nightmares Marissa and I had that night. I doubt I will ever find out, but if you happen to get a response from the cab driver, LOL, let me know, please. I included more personal and identifying information that would make it so I would definitely know if it were him. Anyways, that's all I have. I've never had a paranormal experience either before or since that event, and I don't want any more. I watch your channel and several ghost hunting shows on TV, but I don't ever want to mess around with anything like a Ouija board ever again. Thank you for letting me share. Janine S. End quote. Whoa. So that encounter is very interesting, but I'm going to do something a little different. I've got some ideas of my own, definitely think I know what was going on there, but I want to see what you all think before I add my 2 cents into it. Please let me know how and what you feel about all of the encounters today in the comments below, please. I will pin the theory that I think is most likely what happened, or I will simply pin the comment I like the best, as I always do, If not enough of you comment on this, which is also usually the case, unfortunately. Comment, guys, even if it's just an emoji. Love you all. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, if you enjoyed hanging out with one another in the premiere. Spread the love by sharing this video. Make sure your notification bell is turned on. Again, like, subscribe, share, comment, positive comments, right? Let me know what you want to talk about next. Send in your encounters with the extraterrestrial, otherworldly, paranormal, supernatural, any and all correspondence with me, sending those in. If you want to be interviewed on my channel about experiences that you've had, if you want autographed copies of my books, literally anything, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. I am currently accepting donations to help me pay for Para-Unity, which is November 1st through 3rd. I have to book my hotel room soon, otherwise I'm not going to be able to go. So if you want to donate to that or just donate in general, PayPal, Cash App, in the links in the description box, my Amazon wish list gift link if you want to send me a gift. You can become a member or a patron. I do have some exciting things coming up for members and patrons. Patrons who pledge $20 a month or more automatically get a personal intuitive oracle reading from me every month. Don't forget, I offer hour to hour and a half long video calls where we can do readings, we can do spirituality sessions, we can do attachment removal and identification, we can do all sorts of really cool things, but you got to hit me up, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com, PayPal, Cash App, member, Patreon, all of that information in the description box. Go to Amazon, type in Gemma Jade books. If you can't find what you're looking for on Kindle, paperback, or Audible from any of my 10 or 11 books, I leave as many links as I can in the description box, but I do have a limit to the amount of letters, numbers, characters that I'm allowed to put down there. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today you're amazing, abundance is your birthright. Don't let anyone make you fear your birthright, right? This abundance. Don't let anyone make you feel like it's stupid or there's something wrong with you simply because they're not brave or strong enough to go out and chase and pursue their dreams and their biggest goals. Like, I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.